So today I'm going to break down a Kodak 2383 film look on DaVinci Resolve. So hopping right into DaVinci, the first thing that I had to do was convert my footage. So utilizing the color space transform, I input that color information for the red, which is red, white, gamut, RGB for the color space. And then the input gamma is red log 3G10. And then for this specific grade, I was going to work in DaVinci wide gamut alongside with DaVinci intermediate. And then as for my CST out node, we're going to input that same color space information with DWG. And then for the output color space would be Rec 709 and Rec 709-A because I'm on Mac. So the first thing I like to do is mess with my exposure and contrast. So I made sure that I had a middle gray point, and then I adjusted my highlights and shadows as needed to create a nice little smooth S curve. And then going on with that, I made sure that I adjusted my exposure. So I increased my shadows a bit, dropped down my gamma, and then dropped down my gain as well, alongside with the highlights. Now coming over to my primaries, I wanted to add more of a little greenish bluish tint. So that way I dropped down with my lift, and then I also decreased the reds in the gamma, and then increased the blues within those midtones. To isolate for the skin, I made sure I went to the HSL qualifier. I made sure I utilized the hue, the saturation, and the luminous, alongside with the matte finesse to make sure that I could clean it up as best as I possibly could. Once I was done with all that, I came over to my gamma, and then I increased the strength with the reds. And then with the vector scope, I try to make sure that the skin tones were as close as I possibly could to the skin tone line. So coming over to my HDR wheels, I wanted to decrease the shadows, so I kind of dropped it down almost to a quarter of a stop. For cinematic saturation and filmic density, I made sure that I utilized the HSV node alongside with the HSL node, so that way they could complement one another. And then for density, I came over to the color slice tool, and I increased the density and decreased the density depth. I used the DCTL for the desatch tool, then I was able to drop down some of my reds and then drop down some of my greens. And then to bring some of those greens right back, I utilized the Tetra tool, and then I also messed around with the green and blue hues as well. For filmic contrast, I also added another DCTL, which is free, and then I dropped down the contrast just a little bit more. Now on top of this, all the fun stuff comes from Dehancer. So basically I used the Kodak Gold 200 film print, messed around with some of the film development contrast boost. For my print, I made sure that I used the Kodak 2383 print film, and then I dropped down the tonal contrast and increased the color density. The final two splashes that I had was making sure that I added some film grain, which I used a 35mm ISO 250, and then for bloom, I also used a 35mm Super 35. Now obviously, if you don't have Dehancer, there's another free way to do so, and if you want to see that free version and full breakdown for this whole entire video, it's actually going to be available on YouTube and my Patreon. So if you like tutorials like this, feel free to follow for more, and that's how I did a Kodak 2383 film look in DaVinci Resolve.